Hello. Are food shortages coming in the near future? Are you prepared or will you have to eat bugs? Welcome to the Forge and Anvil podcast, where we embrace uncomfortable conversations about culture and politics to sharpen ourselves for the race set before us. Joining us to discuss today are our guests from the Renewed Homestead. Guys, feel free to introduce yourselves.
Well, we're Ben and Denise, and we moved out of the city in Phoenix, Arizona, and moved to a homestead in Western North Carolina.
Grow our own food and become a little more self-sufficient and make sure we knew what was in our food.
Awesome. And now you are vlogging all along the way. Is that right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, basically
Awesome.
starting a homestead from, I wouldn't say complete scratch, but we had to completely redo the house, and it was an old tobacco farm, so there's been a lot that we've had to do to improve it.
Awesome. Well, welcome. We're looking forward to it. And joining us as well is my co-host, Zach Aval.
Hello, friends. Zach Aval, singer-songwriter, guitar player extraordinaire, can be found at Zach Aval Music on the Instagrams, doing some stuff on YouTube too. We're hitting you with hee-hees, ha-has, and fa-la-las, and learning music all along the way.
Awesome. All righty. Well, we're going to dive straight into our story. So this is from the Daily Wire. Experts warn of impending global food shortage that could lead to social unrest and riots. Risk assessment experts at several companies worldwide are issuing dire warnings about a global food shortage that, combined with other problems, could inevitably lead to unrest and riots. It goes on to say, many factors are leading to this global food crisis, including 6 months of war in Ukraine, supply chain problems, and worldwide inflation. In 2007 and 2008, high food costs led to riots and protests across 48 countries, and prices today are already higher than they were then. While a host of issues is causing increased food prices, high fertilizer costs are also leading to problems. High fertilizer costs resulted in Peruvian and Greek farmers heading to cities to share their frustration. In addition, Sri Lanka protesters pushed out the current administration after they forcibly entered the presidential palace. Experts have said that was partly because a chemical fertilizer ban that led to fewer crops harvested. Officials at the United Nations are increasing their warnings about the lack of fertilizer, especially as regions of Africa are dealing with prices that have surged by 300% since the war in Ukraine. There are at least 50 countries that rely on Russia and Ukraine for at least 30% of their grain, including several developing nations in North Africa and Asia, according to Marsh, per the Wall Street Journal. One example is Turkey, which imported 78% of its wheat from the two warring countries in 2020. Brazil is the primary market for Russian fertilizers. So anyways, there we go, folks. That's the gist of the article. I know there was a lot to unpack there, but Ben, we'll go ahead and start with you, but I'd love to get your initial reaction to that.
Mm-hmm. We know that there's multiple reasons for.
Oh, we may have lost our friends with the Renewed Homestead. Are they gone for you as well, Zach?
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, while we wait for them to reboot and join the stream, Zach, what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I mean, social unrest it's always happening. There's always something for people to be upset about. It seems to be happening more recently. Food shortages or threats of food shortages or warnings of food shortages can certainly lead to more social unrest. And it seems like less westernized countries will be the ones that struggle with it the most. I think here in the United States will be better off because there are, just the rise in things like homesteading and people just, during the pandemic, learning how to farm and how to garden and things like that. I think just even if there were shortages, like it was difficult to buy produce at a grocery store or something like that, I think a lot of us here in the States aren't going to do too bad. It just depends on who you know. I know several people that have small gardens and a few that are farmers. So I would never be without food.
Awesome. And Ben and Denise, I know we lost you for a second there, but feel free to pick up where you left off.
Thanks.
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying that I think there are wealthier Western countries that I think are right, that aren't going to feel the pinch that countries like we've seen Sri Lanka, Africa obviously is really hit. There's poorer countries in South America, Central America that are really feeling this more than we will. I think we're going to feel the costs of food. I mean, with everything else going on, you've got energy prices rising. I mean, we were fortunate. We only got, I think we just heard we're getting an 18.1% energy increase, which, you know, compared to what some other states are feeling, that's not bad. So I think we'll be affected. I think there's going to be food that people might not be able to afford, but we're going to be in a lot better shape. And I don't think we're going to hit the famine. I don't think we're going to hit famine level. Like I know some channels are out there saying, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world. It's SHTF. I think it's going to get difficult here. I don't think it's going to be as bad. I think Europe is really going to struggle, and we obviously know the poorer countries are going to struggle. And there's crops, and if you look at, you know, wheat crop, corn crop, potato crops in the U.S. and throughout the world are down. And, you know, you had the flooding in Pakistan and everything else that has happened. And so it's definitely going to, Europe is going to feel it, and other parts of the world are going to feel it. We'll feel it, but we won't starve like other parts of the world will.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's going to get
absolutely.
expensive though. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, you know, that's a lot of the reason why we want to discuss these issues here, because we may be insulated, but of course we need to know that supply chains it affects your wallet, first of all, as well as we are going to probably see a lot of struggle going on across the globe if some of these predictions do come true. And I know that you guys at the Renewed Homestead have been, of course, videographing your entire journey from homesteading. So you said that you guys originally went from Phoenix, Arizona, and then you said you're in, where are you currently at? You said North Carolina. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, we're in the Appalachians in Western North Carolina.
Thanks for pronouncing it correctly. It's pronounced Appalachia. Yeah, I learned that the hard way down there.
Yes.
Connor, if you didn't know that, you're welcome.
I did know that, thankfully, but I still struggle to say it correctly no matter how many times I hear it. So maybe one day I'll get it correct. But awesome. Well, I'd love to hear, since you guys have been doing these homestead vlogs, and given, you know, the craziness of the world today, have you guys seen a major influx of new viewers and new people getting into homesteading?
Well, we have, and then we
stepped on toes.
We stepped on toes on YouTube a little bit.
Oh.
So yeah, we discussed a little bit of the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the issues with not addressing the chemical issues that we're using that are killing, 3.5 quadrillion insects every year. And, we mentioned the fact that the things that are in the Inflation Reduction Act sound great, but if we go too quickly, like Sri Lanka, we're going to crash like Sri Lanka did. Utilizing less chemical fertilizer is good, but we need cows for that. We need sheep for that. We need ruminant animals for that. So there's a lot of
transition.
We need to transition, and we shouldn't have an administrator who doesn't know anything about farming that's in charge of what's going to happen with it. And so we did a video on that and some of the chemicals. And after that, we noticed everything got really, like, everything shut down for a while. So, but yeah, we did see a new influx for a while. And then the last, I'd say, month and a half or so, we've noticed things. And it was right after that video. So
Suspicious timing then, to say the least.
It was, yes. Yeah. But we've had a lot of people reach out to us. Unfortunately, there's a lot of fear mongering going on, and there's a lot of people saying you're too late, or you've got to do this now, or you're going to starve. And I agree, you need to prepare, but I don't think fear is the way to do it. I think you need to encourage people and show them how to do things, and let them know they might make a mistake. That's okay. You'll learn, and encourage them on things they can do, and help them feel like they can prepare. Yeah,
absolutely. And you mentioned something about the chemicals that we use in a lot of our agriculture. So I am curious, what is kind of your guys' philosophy on, how you handle things like growing your food? Do you guys tend to take a real naturalistic like permaculture kind of route, or do you guys kind of split the middle between the sort of big farm methods and kind of the holistic approach? I'd love to hear you guys unpack that a little bit.
We're pretty much full permaculture. I mean, we make our own compost. We get the litter from the chicken coop and meat scraps and all that. Make our own compost, which goes back on the garden. We specifically got meat rabbits, both to feed our dogs, but rabbit poop you can go directly right on your. It doesn't have to be composted or break down. Excuse me.
We're completely chemical free.
No chemicals. I mean, where we live, we're kind of more or less at the top of the mountain. So all the water source, it comes out of the mountain to us, but then anything that goes on past us, we don't want to pollute our neighbor's water. So, and it's just for the earth. You don't want to, I'm not a tree hugger, but I mean, we're stewards of the land. We want to leave the place better than we found it. Part of our goal in the property that we do own, we're setting it up so the kids can't sell it. We don't want this parted out into another subdivision that's going to get, next thing it's going to look like, Phoenix, Arizona. We don't want that. So the land is as good or better than we found it. So.
Yeah, and we don't worm our animals. We don't use any chemicals. We unfortunately, a fox got in and slaughtered 11 of our chickens. It was awful, but we ended up bringing some other chickens for the egg production in from outside. Some of them with, I think it may have been coccidiosis. I wasn't sure, but we were able to treat them with garlic and without vinegar, and within like 3 to 4 days, they were fine. We rotate our animals. So our sheep that are in the pasture and our goats, and we'll be adding cows soon, they get rotated every 2 days. So we don't have the worming issues because they're not eating the ground off of their poop. And, so we do regenerative agriculture. We will not use chemicals. We are very much into permaculture. I actually just finished up the classes for my permaculture design certificate.
There is one chemical that we use.
Oh, there is one that we did. Yeah.
But we have jackets that live in the ground, and she notoriously steps on them, and they sting.
Yeah,
we spray those.
That's about the only thing we use chemicals on. But yeah, we're very in our faith, we believe that God gifted us this land, and we believe that it's up to us to take care of this land as much as we possibly can. And I find that when you fight nature, it doesn't work well. So if you utilize nature and you mimic nature, things go easier. So, and I feel like our modern agriculture system, which is, I think, part of the issue that we're having, well, I think a huge part of it, especially with the chemical fertilizers that we've been using, we fight nature instead of looking to see, okay, how does nature do this? So,
yeah, I agree. And of course, that's really a discussion that, the idea of going against nature has really been a theme of a lot of the cultural conversations going on right now. Now, I know that for me, I actually, I'm beginning to kind of start homesteading. I don't have a large homestead by any means, but I have a small patch of land, and I've got about 20 chickens, and my wife and I did a garden this year, and we didn't quite get a fall garden going. We missed our window, unfortunately. But I've really found that being close to the land has greatly impacted my faith. I feel like the Lord has taught me a lot through working and toiling with my hands. And I do believe that there is something biblical about actually getting out and putting your hand to the plow, so to speak. Now, I'm curious, do you feel like the relationship between your homestead and when you guys were living in Phoenix and in a more metropolitan area, do you feel like you've really had a revitalized experience with your faith as you've moved to North Carolina and started homesteading?
That's a good question. I think more so for me, just, I grew up in Phoenix, but I was born in Scottsdale, and just, go to work, come home, mow the lawn, make dinner, rinse, lather, repeat, and just, more or less going through the motions, and here, we say every day we get to wake up to a postcard. We get to see and experience the weather changes and the seasons changing. You can hear the rain coming up over the mountain as it rolls in, and just, seeing nature like that, it just furthers your belief in the Creator and the gifts that we have. So for me, it's definitely brought me closer to God, I think. And, I don't.
Well, you're happier too.
Well, I'm happier too.
Yeah.
Well, and I also retired. After 30 years of banking, with all the things going on, and, living through 2008 and what happened to the stock market and all that, I said, I got to get my money out of my 401k. So I went to my employer, and they're like, well, you can't have it. I'm like, what do you mean I can't have it? Well, you're not allowed to have it as long as you're employed. Well, here's my 2 weeks then. So I retired and took that out and paid off as much of the homestead as we can. We still got a little bit of debt that we're working on. We're trying to get debt free so that we don't have to worry about that. And yeah, definitely much happier.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's
and for me,
awesome.
I don't know, the more I learn about nature and permaculture and God's design, the closer I come to it, the more I'm in awe of it. Cause it's like, how do you, like, when you go through permaculture, and anybody can actually YouTube this, there's actually patterns that we see in nature, and it's in us, it's in, plants and animals. And Jeff Lawton does a really good job of explaining that. He does a video on YouTube called Patterns that people that aren't in permaculture can look up. And I'm like, I don't know how you don't see these patterns in nature and see how everything works together, and don't say there's a creator, there's God. And we marvel at it every single day. I mean, like, we're blessed enough to live in one of the most beautiful places in the world. And we get to wake up every day to that beauty. So, and like you said, I don't think we're meant to be in an office, 8 to 10 hours a day with no sunshine, or no, not being in the ground in, big concrete cities. I just don't think, soul wise, I don't think we were meant for that. Yeah. So I think we're meant to be more, like you said, when your hands are in the dirt, or being outside and appreciate. I think that's what we're really meant to be. Yeah,
absolutely. And Zach, I'm going to bring you in here a little bit, because I know right now you are in a similar position that I think many people have found themselves after COVID, where you are working remote from home. And you are currently living in an apartment, if I remember correctly. So how do you feel like you've adjusted to working from home? And kind of going off of the theme of what we've talked about, how do you tend to, how do you challenge yourself to get out and about in nature? And do you happen to feel that same connection that we've been talking about when you actually get out under the open sky?
Yeah. So, I mean, I had initially resisted the idea of actually working from home, just for practical reasons. I wanted to have work be a workplace, and this is a place of rest where I do my art and stuff like that, because the only place I would be able to set up effectively a remote workstation is in the room we're in now. But I decided to give it a shot. And none of the bad things that I thought were going to, unsurprisingly, right? None of the bad things I thought were going to happen. I was able to still make that mental distinction between working and my artistic endeavors. And then to answer the question about, there's something to be said in experiencing nature. I mean, back when I lived in Nashville, I used to go through the Ellington Agricultural Center all the time. There's some hiking trails through there. And so you do get, I mean, there's something about, especially in the mountains there, where you get a good idea of just size and scale. You realize how small you as an individual are, and there's all these other processes that God has spoken in the motion going on around you. And so just even that sometimes, I know I still live in the city, but I have access to parks and even some lots and things like that I do walk just about every day through. So I still get that sense of, wonder, realizing that especially if it's good, especially if you're feeling anxious, to just go outside sometimes, because then you kind of get that experience of understanding that there's more to life than just whatever I'm experiencing. So I guess to go back to answering that question more directly, it is a humbling thing for me to be out in nature.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know for me, something that I really leaned heavily on the last while when I first got into gardening is, and this is a free documentary for anyone that's interested, but I watched the documentary Back to Eden by Paul Gauci. And, I would say Mr. Gauci is a very strong believer, and you can see that the Lord just really taught him through nature how he can connect with God and how he can work with God's creation to be a steward and a true master of the earth, from a very biblical perspective. And that's really been a thing that's really been bringing me closer when I start to recognize God's design and really flow with that instead of fighting that. But I want to transition a little bit because I do have some questions that I'll open up to all three of you. We have heard a lot of these food shortage stories coming up in the news in recent times. And all three of you have said that you do believe that it's going to get harder, but we are not necessarily in danger here in the third world. So my first question is, what do you three see as actually being the greatest upcoming challenges when it comes to our food security, and how can we mitigate those challenges?
Well, one of the biggest, I'm just going to say it, our government. I don't think our government understands. I think they are doing things that don't make any sense. They're making things harder, and farmers have a difficult time. And I don't believe in modern agricultural practices, but you can't just flip a switch and go from chemical use fertilizers that have pretty much deadened the soil, and then think you're going to have regular fertilizers while you're getting rid of all the ruminant animals that you need to actually heal the land. And, obviously we don't have time to get into the whole climate change issue, but when you're sitting there saying you've got to get rid of ruminant animals, when the ruminant animals are the very thing that are going to actually heal the land, I think that's a huge issue. For one, I think the government's causing all kinds of issues, and they're focusing on the wrong things.
And selling our surplus to other countries rather than keeping it here.
Yes.
But even fertilizer aside, farmers can't afford the fuel to plow the lands and plant the crops and all that. So, it's not like, and if they do, those higher costs are going to get passed on to us. So like Denise said at the beginning, our food costs are going to go way up. We will still have food. I mean, might not be eating caviar or whatever ritzy stuff is, but
we eat that anyways.
No, but it's just.
Well, and the average farmer is what, in their 60s, I believe is what they said, the average age of a farmer, and it's because their kids don't want to take over. And can you blame them? I mean, the farmers, spend their whole lives working, to be in debt and to, basically, be at the altar of big agriculture, and they can't get ahead. And the kids are looking at that. My parents have worked their whole entire lives, and, now they're having to sell the land or, because they can't afford it. And so I think there's a lot of issues there. I think our government really is one of the main issues that's facing our food supply. And then, of course, people, we've always had it really good in this country. We are very spoiled when you look at us compared to other countries, and we've never wanted for anything. Like, I know I'm 47, Ben's in his 50s. We've had hard times, of course, 2000, 2008, right? Well, it's 2000, 2001, and then 2008, but nothing like the Great Depression.
Right.
And so we just assume that things are going to be there, and we're so disconnected from our food supply that we just assume I'm going to go to the grocery store and just get it. It'll always be there. And it might not always be there. I mean, what were you saying earlier about you would just baking something?
Oh, well, I listened to another podcast, and this guy, his family runs a freeze-dried food company. I can't think of the name of it offhand, but he was saying, he's got suppliers, whereas he used to have 2 or 3 different suppliers Now he might have one or two, and he has a backup or back order to get part of the ingredients for making the meals. And so he's like, you're making grandma's cookies. Well, it's all well and good, but when you don't have baking soda and chocolate chips, well, they're not going to be grandma's cookies. So my grandmother just passed a couple years ago, and she was 98, 99, and she lived through the Great Depression, and she lived on a farm in Ohio. And other than the news, they didn't know any better. They went about their daily lives and had their chickens and cows and all that. They lived on a farm, so the Great Depression didn't affect them whatsoever, other than what they heard in the news. Today, we are completely opposite, where back in her time, 85 to 90% of the people lived rural and on farms and raised their own food. Now we're completely opposite, where 85 to 90% are in the cities and have no idea how to grow a tomato. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing that's going to come down and hurt things, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Zach, I don't know if you had any thoughts on what was said there, as well as, you probably would agree with their assessment, would be my guess, as you are libertarian anarchists. So now, that being said, Zach, what do you think the government's role would be in terms of mitigating this? Do you think it's just something where we need to tell them to get out of the way, or is this something where you think there should be some incentive for future farmers?
That's such a broad question. It's almost it's real difficult to answer. It kind of just depends on that's going to be a case by case thing there. I know that when it comes to the farm subsidies and things like that, I know a lot of the smaller farms aren't necessarily they don't receive as much as some of the larger farms there, and I think that's kind of what she was talking about with big agriculture there. And then, as far as to the first question that you asked about initial, challenges and things like that, and in addition to the government, I would say, just to piggyback off their answer, it would just be people's response in general to that. So more specifically there, when they hear things about pending food shortages and things like that, how do they react? Because that's more so than any policy or anything like that is going to be what you're going to notice immediately is, I think about early pandemic with all the panic buying and things like that, where it was really difficult to come by toilet paper here where I live for almost a couple months there. And just by some miracle, I had just enough. And then within weeks of it starting to come back on shelves is when I needed to stock up again. But, just things like that, where canned goods and things like that will, be flying off the shelf needlessly. You just have to be cautious. You don't want to be like the people that panic buy everything and empty their bank accounts and things like that. Just proceed with caution. It's kind of like we talked about, we're well insulated here, but we're not bulletproof. Nobody's inflation proof. There's a handful of people that would, that are just wealthy enough that they might be able to, but nobody, is going to be able to, not look at their grocery bill and feel like they got a little bit gypped. So, just being cautious there. And, taking advantage of when things are cheap and things like that, not necessarily taking too much, but just being cautious there and resisting the urge to freak out. Because there's most of all of our lives here on this podcast, there has been some type of food shortage scare at least once a decade or so. The last one was, again, during the pandemic there. It's never really passed the way it's been, the way it was predicted. And, as far as poverty and things like that, globally, we are actually winning the war on poverty. If you look at, poverty trends over the last 100 years or so, you see a sharp, slow decline in global poverty rates. So I think sometimes people tend to lose courage and get a little bit saddened by the things that are right in front of them. It's harder to see that bigger picture that doesn't necessarily, even though I know people like me that make that argument sometimes tend to forget that just because it is, heading in the right direction doesn't mean that nasty things don't pop up every now and again and need to be addressed. And how you handle that is to take courage and ultimately look to God is what I do in those moments there.
Yeah, good advice. And Ben and Denise, with our remaining time, I really wanted to ask you as well. So we are already, over a week into October. So fall is upon us. Winter's right around the corner. So if someone's launching this podcast and they are wanting to become a little bit more resilient in their self-reliance and their food security, what kind of advice would you give someone? And I'm going to have you be a little specific here. What kind of advice would you give someone of things that they need to be doing specifically right now, knowing that we are well into fall? And what would you give that advice for someone who's maybe in a suburban setting, as well as someone who's in maybe Zach's setting, where they're in an apartment, like a college student in a dormitory? Just little ways that they can begin to move the needle a little bit on being more self-reliant.
It's our kids are all adults and they're all in apartments and back in so we encourage them, and we always encourage our subscribers, just when you go to the grocery store, buy one extra of something. Don't everybody says skip the coffee, which is great. Skip if you can go without your Starbucks, your $6 coffee. I mean, that's going to buy you 2 or 3 bags of dried beans. Okay, doesn't sound all that appetizing, but it does a lot for your psyche, knowing that, okay, I've got some extra food in the pantry. So each time you go buying it, instead of buying 1 can of soup, buy 2. I'm not saying go into debt for it. I know a lot of people right now are using credit cards to pay for food, and that's a desperate situation in its own. But buy a little bit extra. My kids used to tease me about, oh, Dad, you're being a prepper kind of thing. And then when the toilet paper shortage hit, they're like, oh, maybe there is something to this. So, just buy a little bit extra if you can. You don't have to run out and buy freeze dryers and buy all the MREs and things like that. But, buy one more if you can, and get yourself out of debt as quick as possible. That will help you in the long run. But
well, and I think if you're in an apartment, like you said, you can buy some extra food, but do you have a balcony that faces the sun? Can you throw some containers out there? Obviously we're going into winter right now. We do have a small fall garden that's going with like spinach and kale and things of that nature. But we know pretty soon, our weather's getting cold early here. So we probably won't have that fall garden, but we have some other things to fall back on, thankfully. But if you have a balcony, what can you grow during the growing season? Tomatoes or, beans, whatever it is that you can grow, lettuces. If you're out west where the weather's great, then maybe start looking at preparing a garden. If you can go find somebody that doesn't worm their animals and pick up manure for them, maybe go to a farm. Like if you like, a Zach situation, right? He might be in an area where there might be a homestead or there might be a farm. Maybe say, hey, can I barter? If I help you, can I get some of the meat, or can I get some of the fruit and veg that you have? So there's options that you have to do things, not only stock up and stocking up too. I know a lot of people stock up for, SHTF and they think it's, Armageddon. But SHTF can be as simple as a job loss. It's something that really affects you, right? So there might be a job loss. So right now, that bag of rice might be $20, but next month it might be 30 or 35. So you're protecting yourself from some of these higher prices as well. But go see if you can barter, plan if you have the space. There's a lot of people that are in suburban settings, but they still have small yards. Look at setting up a garden next year. Buy seeds now. We don't know what the seed situation is going to be next year. So get some seeds now. Start watching some YouTube videos. Start reading some books.
Get to know your neighbors. Because
Yeah.
if things get bad, they're going to be the people closest to you, and you kind of need to know them. Because, if you got somebody that's, well, we don't need to go into that. It's just that it's good to know your neighbors, and maybe between the two of you, you could grow a garden. Two of you, or however many, you can grow a garden. If there's a community area, and if you're in an HOA, maybe you could get an exception to have a community garden there where everybody chips in and works it.
Well, yeah. And there's also senior citizens that might have the yard space that you don't have, that you might be able to say, hey, I'll share the food. Let me do the work. I'll share the food with you. Can I use your yard space? Right. So there's options that you have out there. And if for whatever reason you don't want to do any of those options, or you can't, like you said, just get some extra food. Rice, beans are usually inexpensive. Make sure you have some spices. So if you have to do rice and beans, you can make it taste a little better.
And please don't forget your pets. People, when they're prepping, they prep for their family, but your dogs and cats become very important to you emotionally, with the job loss or things going on, the pandemic, people felt trapped at home, and those animals were a lifeline for a lot of people. So make sure you have extra pet food set aside, because as things get worse and pet food gets more scarce and more expensive, unfortunately, as inflation goes up, a lot more pets get turned into the Humane Society and shelters. And
Which we're seeing, unfortunately.
Yeah, we're seeing it. I mean, they're already at max capacity as it is. So, don't forget to prepare for your pets too.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's some great advice and a lot of great ideas that most people probably haven't even thought about. So I really appreciate you guys sharing your wisdom on that. And I know that we don't have as much time to get into everything as we can, but that's where your guys' YouTube channel comes in. So we are basically out of time, but where can people find you guys?
We're at Renewed Homestead on YouTube. RenewedHomestead.com is our website. And if they want to reach us directly, they can reach us at renewedhomestead@gmail.com.
Awesome. And Zach, where can people find you?
At Zach of All Music on the Instagram, at Zach of All, my first and last name, on the YouTube. Lots of cool music stuff coming out there, some teaching stuff, some nerdy stuff, things like that. Until next time, this is your pal Zach signing off, reminding you that you're very unique, just like everybody else.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Well, this has been the Forge and Anvil podcast. If you want to support the show, go to forgeandanvil.locals.com. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank y'all.
Thanks for having us.
Have a good night.
Bye.